My mother told me that if I married him, she would not come to my wedding. I begged her. I cried. I told her he was the kindest man I had ever met. I told her he made me feel safe in a way nobody ever had. I told her that what he did for a living did not define who he was as a person. She said a farmer was not good enough for her daughter. She did not come to my wedding. Neither did my father. My name is Grace. I am 31 years old, and I am going to tell you the story of the day I chose love over approval, and everything that happened after. I grew up in a family that cared deeply about appearances, not in a cruel way. My parents were not bad people. They worked hard their entire lives to give me and my brother every opportunity they never had. My father was an accountant. My mother was a school administrator. We lived in a nice house in a good neighborhood. I went to a good university. The plan, their plan, was always clear. Good education, good career, good husband, good life. The definition of good was very specific in our house. Good meant professional, good meant suit and tie, good meant someone with a title after their name. Good meant someone who could take me to nice restaurants and talk about the stock market and impress their friends at dinner parties. Good did not mean someone with soil on his hands at the end of the day. I met Daniel at a farmer's market 3 years ago. I was not even supposed to be there. My friend had dragged me along on a Saturday morning, and I was tired and slightly annoyed and thinking about going home. He was selling vegetables at a small stall at the end of the row. Tomatoes, courgettes, herbs, fresh eggs. Everything laid out simply and carefully. I stopped because the tomatoes looked extraordinary. I am not even someone who thinks much about tomatoes. He laughed when I told him that. He said most people do not notice tomatoes until they taste a good one. Then he handed me one to try right there at the stall. I stood at a farmer's market at 9 in the morning eating a tomato, and I remember thinking, this is the best thing I have eaten in years. We talked for 40 minutes. My friend eventually came and found me and gave me a look I will never forget. Daniel asked for my number before I left. I gave it to him before I had even finished deciding whether I should. He called the next day, not a text, a call. I almost did not answer because nobody calls anymore, and it startled me. But I picked up, and we talked for 2 hours. By the third date, I already knew he was different from anyone I had ever been with. Daniel was calm in a way that felt earned rather than performed. He worked with his hands and his land and the seasons, and there was something about that, something grounded and real, that I had never experienced before. He did not talk about himself to impress me. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. I brought him home to meet my parents after 4 months. My mother was polite, extremely polite, the kind of polite that is actually the opposite of warm. She asked him careful questions over dinner. What did he study? Where did he grow up? What were his plans for the future? Daniel answered everything honestly and without embarrassment. He was proud of what he did. He loved his work. He talked about his farm with the same passion my father talked about his career. My parents said goodbye pleasantly at the door. The moment Daniel left, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me this was not serious. I told her it was very serious. She told me I was being naive. I told her I was 28 years old, and I knew what I wanted. She said a farmer could not provide the life I deserved. I asked her who decided what life I deserved. That was the beginning of 8 months of arguments. Every family dinner became a negotiation. Every phone call had an agenda. My mother sent me job listings for men she thought were more suitable. My father told me quietly one evening that he just wanted me to be financially secure. I told him Daniel worked harder than anyone I had ever met, and his farm was his own business that he had built himself from nothing. My father nodded slowly and said nothing. Daniel knew what was happening. I tried to protect him from the worst of it, but he is not a man who misses things. He told me once, "Grace, I do not need your parents to like me, but I need you to not be ashamed of me." I told him I was not ashamed of him, not even slightly. I was ashamed of them. Daniel proposed on a quiet evening at the farm. No grand gesture. We were sitting outside after dinner watching the sun go down over his fields, and he just turned to me and said, I want to do this with you. All of it. For the rest of my life. I said yes immediately. When I told my mother, she went silent for a long moment. And then she said, "If you marry him, I will not be at that wedding." I waited for her to take it back. She did not. My father called me the next day. He said he supported my mother. He said they hoped I would reconsider. He said they loved me, but they could not watch me make this mistake. I told him it was not a mistake. And I told him I hoped they would change their minds before the wedding. They did not change their minds. I got married on a warm Saturday in September. The ceremony was at the farm. Daniel's family was there. My brother came, the only one from my family who showed up. He held my hand before I walked out and said, "You look beautiful. I am proud of you." I cried into his shoulder for 5 minutes and then fixed my makeup and walked out to marry the man I loved. It was the best day of my life, and the loneliest. The first year of marriage was everything I had hoped it would be. Daniel and I built a life together that felt genuinely ours. I kept my job in the city and drove out to the farm on weekends. We argued about small things and made up quickly. We planted a kitchen garden together even though I had never grown anything in my life. We had dinner outside most evenings when the weather allowed. I was happy, fully and completely happy, in a way I had not known was possible. My parents and I spoke occasionally. Short calls, polite and careful. The distance between us was never acknowledged directly. It just sat there in every conversation like something neither side was ready to name. Then my mother got sick. It was 18 months after the wedding, a diagnosis that was serious but treatable if caught early. It had been caught early, but she needed support. She needed help. I drove to my parents' house the day I found out. I did not call first. I just went. My mother opened the door, and when she saw me standing there, she started crying. Not polite, careful tears. Real ones. The kind that come from somewhere deep. I stepped inside and I held her. We did not talk about the wedding. We did not talk about Daniel. We did not talk about any of it. I just stayed. I came back the next day. And the day after that. Daniel drove with me every weekend. He fixed things around their house that needed fixing. He brought vegetables from the farm. He sat at their kitchen table and talked to my father about nothing in particular for hours. My father shook his hand properly for the first time 6 weeks after my mother's diagnosis. My mother called me one evening about 3 months later. She said, "I need to tell you something." I told her to go ahead. She said, "I was wrong about him. And I was wrong to miss your wedding. And I am sorry." I sat with that for a long moment, and then I said, "I know, Mom, I know." She came to the farm for the first time last spring. Daniel made lunch. My father walked the fields with him for an hour while my mother and I sat on the porch and talked the way we used to before everything got complicated. It was not perfect. Some things that break do not go back together exactly the way they were. But it was real. And it was ours. I chose love over approval 3 years ago. It cost me my parents at my wedding. It cost me a 1.5 years of distance and silence and pain. But it gave me a life that is genuinely mine. A man who loves me without conditions. And eventually, when it mattered most, it gave me my family back too. I want to say one thing to anyone listening who is standing at that same crossroads right now. The people who love you, truly love you, will eventually find their way back to what makes you happy. And the life you build when you stop asking for permission, that is the one worth living.